The confession was already in the file when I opened it, signed in blue ink at the bottom, dated 3 days before the suspect was ever questioned. I remember staring at it, thinking it had been misfiled or planted, because according to every log we had, the interrogation never happened. I didn't come into this case as a detective. I was a records analyst for the county, one of those quiet jobs that keeps you in basements and back rooms, scanning paper into systems no one thinks about until something goes missing. That morning, I was assigned to audit closed felony cases from the late 2000s, old homicides, cases with convictions, cases that were supposed to be done. The name on the folder meant nothing to me at first, just another common American name: arrested, charged, convicted. But the first thing inside wasn't a police report or an arrest affidavit. It was a confession. 4 pages, typed, standard county template, initials at the bottom of each page, a full signature on the last line. I checked the date. Then I checked the interrogation log. There was no interview recorded on that date, or any date before it. I flipped through the rest of the file, expecting to find missing paperwork, something out of order. Instead, everything else was meticulous: timestamps, chain of custody, evidence intake forms. But where the interrogation should have been, there was nothing. No transcript, no audio, no video. And that was the first contradiction. I told myself it was a clerical error. Old cases are messy, tapes degrade, files get lost. Still, something about a signed confession existing without an interview didn't sit right. So I kept reading. The confession described the crime in plain language. No emotion, no flourish. Just facts. Times, locations, actions. Details that had never been released publicly. I cross-checked them with the crime scene report. They matched. That was the second contradiction. Later that afternoon, I pulled the digital archive. Every interrogation room in the county had been recording since 2004. Redundant systems, multiple backups. I searched by date, by room number, by suspect name. Nothing. Not corrupted files, not missing files. Blank space. It was like the interrogation had never been scheduled. I brought it up to my supervisor. She barely looked up from her screen, told me older tapes were unreliable, told me to log it as media unavailable and move on. I tried to do that. I really did. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the signature. I'd seen hundreds of forged statements in my career. You develop an eye for it. This wasn't one of them. The pressure marks were right, the spacing, the natural hesitation at the curve of certain letters. It looked like someone signing their own name. The next day, I did something I wasn't technically supposed to do. I sent a copy of the signature to a handwriting analyst I knew from a prior case, off the books, no case number. He didn't know the context. 2 days later, he called me directly. He said the signature was authentic, not just visually convincing, physiologically consistent. Same microtremors, same rhythm. In his words, this person signed this willingly, under normal motor control. That was the third contradiction. I went back to the file and read the confession again, this time slower. Certain phrases stood out, procedural phrases, language suspects don't usually use. References to their right to remain silent spelled out in full. Mentions of waiving counsel, phrased like legal boilerplate. It read like someone who had been told what a confession was supposed to sound like, but still, it had details only the perpetrator should have known. At this point, I wanted to see the suspect. I requested the incarceration record. He was still alive, released on parole years earlier, living 2 counties over. I debated contacting him for a long time. Then I asked myself a question I couldn't shake. If you signed a confession you don't remember giving, wouldn't you want to know? I reached out through the parole office, framing it as a records clarification, nothing alarming. He agreed to meet me at a public library. When he walked in, nothing about him screamed killer. I know how that sounds, but after years in this job, you start to expect something. He was older than his mugshot, thinner, tired. We sat at a small table between shelves of large print books. I showed him the confession. He stared at it for a long time. Then he laughed. Not nervous laughter, not defensive, just confused. He told me he'd never seen it before. I pointed to the signature. He leaned closer, ran his finger under the ink, and then his face changed. He said it was his handwriting. He was certain, but he swore he had never confessed. He remembered the arrest, the holding cell, meeting his lawyer days later. He remembered asking why the police hadn't interviewed him yet. According to him, they told him they already had everything they needed. That was the fourth contradiction. I asked about the details in the confession. He knew them, not as memories, more like familiarity, like hearing a story you've been told so many times it starts to feel personal. He couldn't tell me where he was when he confessed, couldn't remember being in an interrogation room, couldn't remember signing anything, but he didn't deny the crime. That was the most unsettling part. He said something that stayed with me ever since. He said, "If it says I did it, then I guess I did," as if the document carried more authority than his own memory. After that meeting, I requested the interrogation room logs, physical logs, paper sign-in sheets. Every room had entries for that week, except one, B12. The page was intact, no tears, no smudges, just blank, as if it had never been used. But B12 was listed on the confession header as the interview location. I checked the maintenance records. B12 was functional that day, cameras operational, microphones tested, no issues reported. I pulled the system diagnostics. The recording system showed no error, no crash. It showed no activity. That shouldn't have been possible. At this point, I started documenting everything privately. Dates, screenshots, notes. I wasn't trying to blow a whistle. I just didn't want to forget. Then I found something I wish I hadn't. Buried in the court transcript during sentencing, the judge referenced the confession, not its contents, its presence. He said, given the defendant's signed admission, no one objected, not the defense, not the prosecution, as if it was normal. I pulled the defense attorney's notes next. He had filed a motion early on asking for a copy of the interrogation recording. The response from the state was a single sentence: recording unavailable due to technical failure. The motion was withdrawn. No follow-up, no challenge. I contacted the attorney. He was retired now, living out of state. He remembered the case vaguely, said it was open and shut. When I asked about the missing tape, he paused. Then he said something strange. He said, back then, if a confession existed, you didn't question how. That line stuck with me. What would you think if this happened to you? If your name was on a document that changed your entire life and no one could tell you when or how it was created? I kept digging. I looked for other cases handled by the same unit, same years, same detectives. I found 3 more, 3 confessions, all signed, all verified, and in all 3 cases, the interrogation tapes were blank, not erased, not damaged, blank. It was like the interrogation had never been scheduled. I brought this up to my supervisor again. She barely brushed it off. She told me to stop, not angrily, carefully. She said I was misinterpreting archival inconsistencies. She reassigned me the next week. Different department, different building. No explanation. I took that as a warning, but by then the question had already settled in my mind. Why would a confession need to exist if the process of obtaining it didn't matter? The answer came from an old policy memo I found months later, a procedural requirement from that era. In certain cases, a signed confession was required for expedited case processing. Not legally required, administratively required. Without it, evidence reviews slowed, funding approvals stalled, cases backed up. With it, everything moved. No one ever wrote how the confession had to be obtained, just that it had to be there. I never proved anything illegal. I never found a smoking gun, no memo ordering fake confessions, no witness willing to speak, just documents that existed because the system expected them to. The suspect I met at the library passed away last year, natural causes. His obituary mentioned nothing about the conviction, just a man who lived quietly. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that blank interrogation room. about cameras that never blinked, microphones that never reported a word, and a signature that changed everything. If you're watching this and this case unsettled you, I'd like to hear your theory in the comments. Give this video a like if it stayed with you longer than you expected, and subscribe for more shadow case files. Some confessions are never given, they're just required.